Well, good afternoon. As I understand it, this is a really hot topic these days. Certainly you can't open the newspaper without seeing some new event where a woman is now the new leader of some organization, whether it's a country or head of Secret Service, which was in this morning's newspaper. How many of you folks noticed that? Yeah, okay, this group would. Great, excellent. You know, one of the things that is not in my bio that I wanted to mention is my early work in graduate school was in the area of biopsychology. And I was explaining to some folks earlier on that my first love was biology and biopsych, but I saw I had some other skill sets and felt that I could actually make a living in the business world. But there's a part of me that is still an academic. And so when Wiley approached me about doing a book on developing women leaders, and they said, well, we want you to have the research basis for it in leadership studies and gender studies, I knew I needed to do that work myself, and so I did. And so some of what I'm going to be talking with you about today comes from the Developing Women Leaders book and the research that was done for that. I will talk with women and men in Fortune 500 companies and universities. And it also came out of my 20-plus years of experience inside large companies, Verizon, Sony, and IBM, where I had leadership roles in a variety of areas related to some of the more technical aspects of human resources and psychological science. Another point I want to mention is developing women leaders in STEM. As a result of some of the consulting work I was doing over the last year and some of the stories that I was hearing from women who are in engineering or aerospace firms, it occurred to me that clearly this is a group of extraordinarily bright people, in a way that are best and brightest, if I might say. And yet the issues that they are encountering made me think back to as though we're back in the 1950s or 1960s. And so I thought, what can I do in my small way to try to see if I can make a contribution or move the ball? My focus has been on enabling both men and women to understand more about these issues that we face. And so the subtitle of the book is A Guide for Men and Women in Organizations. But I started to turn my attention to the issue of women in STEM. And so I'm very happy to be with you here today. Now, this is Women's History Month, and for some of you who may have seen this before, this was July of 1848 up in Seneca Falls, New York. And you can see that the women are in their dresses of white. It was very hot in Seneca Falls that July. There was no air conditioning. And of course, bringing the baby to work meant just this, marching in service of the cause. This was for the sake of women's suffrage. But as you may realize, women did not get the vote until when? 1920. And so it has taken 165 years and 6 generations later, and men and women are still trying to figure out how to use their combined talents to live and work together. And so when you think of women's leadership, I want to ask you as a group, and I'll take a few responses from the audience, what do you find exciting and perplexing about women's leadership? Anybody? What do you find exciting and perplexing? Now, I know you do. In the back, yes.
The perception of women to women leaders.
The perception of women
To women leaders.
to women leaders. Okay. Say a little more about that, if you would.
Well, I think having had a woman at one point work for me, when I took that position, she took her role as a step down because now she was working for a woman and not a man.
So there is not as much respect for women towards women leaders.
In some cases.
Okay. What else? What else do you find perplexing and exciting about women's leadership? Let's take a couple more. Yes?
I don't find anything perplexing, but I think the diversity and perspective of thought
What is exciting is the diversity of thought that women bring to the table, and the perspective. Great. And one more. What do you find exciting and perplexing? Yes, in the back.
Exciting in that you can become a mentor and an example to other women and help them along their path.
Exciting in that you can be a mentor and bring other women along. Great. And let me take one more. I saw a hand up in here. Yes, Benita.
What I find perplexing is that women don't often reach out to other women and help them along. They are not as likely to extend themselves in the mentorship role.
Yes. Women are not as likely to extend themselves in the mentorship role or reach out to other women. Yes. So these are all issues that we are facing now, and we see maybe some of us have had a great deal of experience with or experiences relating to this. And one of the ways of looking at this is to think in terms of the pace of change occurring at three levels: the individual, the organizational, and the societal. And starting with the individual, we know that one way in which people are able to improve their situations in life, sometimes their socioeconomic conditions, is to get an education. And so I'm talking to the choir here. Those of us who are in this room have probably a great deal of education. And we've seen that it's made tremendous changes in our lives and in the lives of those around us. The second layer, in a way, moving out, is towards organizational changes. And so that takes a little bit longer. So it involves policies and practices of an organization. And then finally, the third layer that even takes a bit longer than that are the societal changes. And that's where we see the need to make changes in legislative or governmental entities. And so sometimes it's helpful when we, especially if one is getting a little perplexed, to think of this pace of change on these three levels and to recognize that really the way in which we can have the greatest impact is on the individual level. And so we think of the societal changes. I'm going to mention a few here that I'm sure all of us have been impacted by. Need to optimize the talents of a diverse, multicultural, intergenerational global workforce. Certainly as scientists, we see that there is this sort of complexity of thought around the globe, and there has always been great communication across the scientific world, perhaps more so than in other areas. But we're seeing that now in all industries and areas of endeavor. The gender role changes. We have now, because of, in part, increased education, we have dual career marriages. Women are primary breadwinners. Somebody just recently sent me a small study they had done, but with 400 engineers, and women are a majority of breadwinners in their families in that study. It was reported on at the Society of Women Engineers. It's amazing that we're seeing these kinds of changes. There's less separation of gender roles for men and women. If we think back to the stories that we have heard from our grandparents or even our parents, where there was much more separation at an earlier time, and now way less so. That has really caused a lot of turmoil, certainly in the last several decades, and particularly in this country. But now we see it even spreading across the globe. And then finally, there's this greater emphasis on men and women working together. Here in Brookhaven National Laboratories, what evidence do you folks have? What have you experienced recently? Well, from my discussions prior to this talk, we know that there was the BNL site visit, and the recommendation there was for training to help women and minorities prep for some possible promotion to supervisory roles. The 2012 report from the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology predicts a deficit of 1 million scientists and engineers to meet the workforce demands in the United States over the next 10 years. And then I know that many of you were excited from the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences study, the science faculty's subtle gender biases favor male students, that appeared in October of 2012, where both male and female faculty were equally likely to exhibit bias against the female student. This comes out of actually a lot of social science research that had been done quite some time ago, that now results in a blind selection for orchestra musicians. Is anybody familiar with that work? This study, in a way, duplicates some of that methodology in which the resumes, in this study, the resumes were the same, and the only thing that was different was a male or female name at the top of the resume. And unfortunately, it resulted in the male candidates being more viewed as more competent, hireable, and they were given higher starting salaries. And when this work was done in using an orchestra selection, what we now have, for the most part, is that it has really changed the way in which we select musicians for orchestras. Musicians are now auditioning behind a screen so that the gender and any other identifiable feature of the musician is not seen. It has resulted in something like I believe it was something like a 50% increase in the number of women in orchestras. So clearly something like this tells us a great deal, not only about our selection methodology, but about some of these still existing biases that are existing, that are still going on today. I'm going to jump to that information because that's important for us as we take in what is it we can do about all of this. So we know, of course, that women earn the majority of bachelor's, master's, JD degrees, 36% of MBAs. We also know there's a tremendous need for women and minorities in the STEM fields. But some of the research studies that you may not be as familiar with that really come out of the studies on leadership, it's called transformational and transactional leadership, show that women are more effective leaders in the areas of teamwork and collaboration, stakeholder focus, that is sometimes called a customer orientation or a customer focus, customer care, caring about other people, and on building and developing talent. And on research looking at styles of leadership, we know that women demonstrate more effective visionary. That is, are they able to paint the picture of where the organization is going? What is the big picture here in terms of the strategy of the organization? Participative style, in which people are in when a manager uses a participative style, they are asking and soliciting ideas from their direct reports. And coaching styles of leadership, when a manager uses a coaching style, they are very concerned with the overall career development of the people that work for them. So women are clearly higher in studies showing those differences in leadership styles. Where are the opportunity areas? They're in the area of networking and building one's network, having and gaining a strategic perspective, and that often involves taking different assignments on so that you can see the perspective from the different parts of the organization. Often it is involving financial and budgeting skills. What is it that it takes in order to be able to grow the organization? What are the small details that you need to know about creating the financials and the budget for an organization? Influencing skills. Very often now we must influence without having a hierarchical organizational structure. Communication, and last but not least, self-confidence. So some examples for opportunity areas, and I'm going to come back to this chart later, that might pertain here could be things like finding out how the budgeting process works, getting further information on how to load overhead costs when you're doing your budgets. What are the committees that might benefit from your knowledge or expertise? How do you build a relationship with your funding agency's program manager? And finally, how do you build your networks so that you can have some potential collaboration on projects or even greater exposure to other parts of the lab? You know, in my work as an executive coach, very often I do work mainly with very high potential people in organizations. Their organizations really value them a great deal. But lots of times when I'm called in, I hear these kinds of things. Very aggressive. People are intimidated by her. She's too hard charging. She's very pushy. She's turning people off because she's so aggressive and pushy. Or on the opposite end of the spectrum, she lacks executive presence and confidence. She doesn't speak up in meetings. She sits back. She takes a back seat. We really want to hear her voice, but she's silent most of the time in larger groups. Or, to the point I was making earlier, she doesn't show the strategic big picture thinking. Or, when it comes time to promote or to advance the woman, she doesn't have the experience in, you can pick any one of these, managing a team, or perhaps in a global function, or with planning and budgeting and finance. And finally, she shows promise, but we need to give her one more lateral assignment, or she needs a little bit more experience. And so this is something that's so common, you have to ask, what's really underlying this? Well, one of the things that's very important for us all to understand is the influence of gender stereotypes. Now, stereotyping, as you know, are shortcuts that enable us to summarize a large amount of data. And very often they occur in the areas of stereotyping of race, of gender, even occupation. We know that there are a lot of stereotypes around about, accountants or lawyers or even scientists. When we think about the stereotypes of gender associated with gender, they come in the two flavors of masculine and feminine. The researchers have dichotomized them into the terms agentic and communal. The agentic hence having to do with agency or making a mark on your environment or actually working on the environment, assertive, aggressive, dominant, ambitious, tough, self-promoting, confident. These are all things that we associate with maleness or being male. On the other end are the communal, hence from community, meaning engagement with others. And here's where we think of women as being more helpful and friendly and nurturing and empathetic and kind, altruistic. Both men and women internalize gender stereotypes. And when you think about it, what is one of the first questions we ask when we know that someone's going to have a baby? Is it a boy or a girl, right? And then we begin to relate a little differently, sometimes even before the baby is born, to that little new organism. And let alone when the baby comes into the world, we relate very differently based on whether it's a boy or girl. We even assign different colors, the pink and the blue. And so from very early on, and there's even research showing that people handle babies differently depending on whether they're, male or female babies. So from very early on, we are getting messages about our gender and gender identity. And so these things are occurring at a very unconscious level. But leadership is much more complex for women, because we women have to find the right blend of the agentic and communal behaviors. Otherwise, what happens? How are we labeled? It kind of rhymes with this. So you have to, in any given situation, at any moment of the day, whatever meeting you're in, whatever organization you find yourself in, each woman has to find that blend for herself. So it is very complex. Adding to that, gender stereotyping can lead to the gender biases. And again, this is all documented in leadership research and gender research. But the double bind, so double bind says you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. And so the concept here is that a woman has a very sort of narrow road to walk. And so if she shows too much of the male behaviors, similar to some of the comments I listed before, if she shows anger or too much dominance, she's labeled. And on the other hand, leading an organization, you still have to make the tough decisions, but if you show too much softness or leniency, you're labeled as too soft, not tough enough to do the job. So hence, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. The double standard, there are some research studies showing that there are higher standards expected for women leaders. That is, they have to perform at higher levels in order to be accepted as leaders. Women's competence is often questioned, not presumed. Again, there is this sense of, does she really have what it takes? Is she really competent to do the job? The early studies that were done in this area were showing, we were called like think male, think leader, think male. That was the tag that was given to these kinds of studies. And the concept there was that we think of leaders as males. And certainly we have seen more males as leaders, not only in history, but even currently. And so now, as we're beginning to see more female leaders as heads of state, of different countries, of different organizations, we are beginning to see what does leadership look like when it is in the form of a female leader. But very often we are questioning the woman's competence. And so the study, for example, that was done that I cited back in the October 2012 study out of the proceedings showing the immediate automatic assumption that there was more competence on the part of that male applicant comes out of that work. And then resistance to women's leadership. Lots of times, first of all, let me ask you, how many of you folks in here manage other people? Okay. So some of you may know and may have some firsthand experience with the fact that very often there is resistance to female leadership. It can come in various forms. People may be questioning some of the decisions that you make. They may be questioning why they may have to do something. Or they may even, I always find it amusing, every year there's some sort of study or survey that gets reported in the newspapers about do people like reporting to a female boss? Okay. Why do we ask that question? Why don't we ask, do you like reporting to a male boss? No, that's not what gets reported in the newspapers. So the assumption here is that there is resistance, and certainly there are some studies, a lot of studies backing this up, where it can be in the form of sort of passive resistance or even active resistance. So what is a woman to do? Right? The idea here is that we know that showing greater warmth and collaboration can involve being more likable. So when women have actually been attempting to show more warmth, some of those nurturing qualities, along with the tough, more agentic behaviors, that seems to be the right approach to take. I'm sure we can think of examples where we have seen in the media where we have seen female leaders being too quote, agentic, and then they get branded in a certain way, and yet when they show some of the softer behaviors, it seems to enable them to be more accepted as leaders. It was interesting when Hillary Clinton, many people consider a turning point in her when she ran for vice president as a turning point when she cried, when she showed tears. And it was showing more of her softness and soft behaviors. An example I can give you, I was coaching a woman probably about a year or so ago, large organization. She came from the outside. She had a reputation for being pushy and aggressive. She was in the accounting field, and she was very high-powered. She had all kinds of excellent experience under her belt, but she was very intimidating to a lot of people. By chance, she received an assignment to head up the United Way campaign, among her other responsibilities. And so she was able then to, as part of that assignment, go out, talk to people in various parts of the organization, kind of grassroots politicking, if you will. That year, number one, they had higher giving rates, even during this recession, than they had ever before, number one. But number two, it served to turn around the impression that people had of her. She was naturally very altruistic. She was very kind, and she was very altruistic. People were not seeing it. But by heading up, actually having the United Way campaign and doing the work she had to be doing and meeting a lot of folks and really helping others in this very large corporate effort, she totally turned around, and the impression of her was changed drastically. So another real-life example. And I would urge you to think of those kinds of examples that perhaps you may have seen in your own lives, or you may even, in fact, be experiencing. Why is this important? Well, because the awareness of gender biases leads to effective solutions and strategies to enable men and women to work better together. When I was doing the research for my book, I knew, having been inside large organizations, that there were clearly males who were very good at developing women leaders. And I asked them, what is it that enables you to be a good developer of female talent? And the answer that I got was, well, I really now have some greater insight because my wife, who is out in the business world, gives me some feedback, and my daughters now coming back in and telling me more about what it is they're experiencing. And I had no idea they were experiencing some of these things. And so hopefully men and women will be able to work better together, even having a better understanding of the gender stereotyping. Now, does gender stereotyping work for for males as well? Of course. Particularly now for the younger generations of males. Does anybody have a clue as to how that is operating? Anybody? Mr. Mom, yeah, exactly. The men who are home taking care of the children often encounter a great deal of discrimination and bias when they choose to take on that role. Sometimes also, as I'm coaching younger males in organizations when they're having their first or second child, as a coach, I'm privy to a lot of very confidential information, and people are more likely to tell me things that they obviously cannot tell other people in their organizations. And so I hear very often, Anna Marie, I really wish I could take a month off to be with my wife and new baby, but I can't. People who do that or have tried to are met with a lot of resistance, or their careers get stalled. And so, in a way, that's a way in which stereotyping is operating against them as well. And I think it's important for us all to keep that in balance as we see how stereotyping can really be very poisonous and be operating so that we're not able to realize our full potential as people, as scientists, and as leaders. So some organizational best practices to grow the leadership pipeline of women. This is something that I've spoken to a lot of folks about, and there's even some work done on this whole topic. And this pertains, of course, to female scientists. Help female scientists develop their networks. When I ask people in general, what is it that is going to be most helpful for you in advancing and growing your career? I heard from virtually every woman, the first thing they said to me was, we need to develop our networks. We need to have networks of people at levels in organizations and levels in our organization where they see and they understand the work we do, and so that it also enables me to know, how do I get work done? What is it I have to do? Who do I have to see? Who do I need to talk to? What are the conversations I need to be having with some certain key people in the organization that enables me to do a better job and to really excel at what I'm doing? Best practices in talent management, we now know from leadership work over the last 10 or 15 years, mentoring, coaching, and leadership development in general, training courses, key experiences. And I know you folks here are starting a mentoring program, or mentoring program is being offered now, which is excellent. It's fantastic. All of these are very important experiences that you can choose to give yourself so that you are developing yourself as a scientist and as a leader. Certainly using metrics to track the trends in the attitude and the engagement of women, the attainment of objectives in your recruitment, hiring, and promotion. When I was inside organizations, based on my background in psychology and the work I had been doing, I had responsibility for these kinds of things. Survey work, tracking the metrics, understanding where is the organization going, and looking to see who might be accountable for making the improvements that are necessary. And finally, identifying and rewarding male champions who develop women leaders. When I was talking with some of those male champions when I was working on the book, I knew, first of all, from being inside, that clearly there were men who had the reputation for helping women. And so when I went into an organization to do some interviews, I would ask the question, who is it who is very good at developing talented women? And everybody could always tell me why, because they wanted to work with that person. When I would interview the male, I would say to him, are you aware that you have a reputation for helping develop talent? And invariably, they would say, yeah, I know. Why? He said, well, people want to work with me. I get more applications, people wanting to work with me than I have space for or openings for, but I have a constant ready pool of talent. So it's a win-win for the organization as well as for those individual managers. And companies are now realizing that they need to identify some key male champions so that they can get others on board with this. And so that it's not seen as a negative on the part of a lot of males. Now, how many, I asked you before, how many of you folks are managers in here? So a fair number of you are managers. One of the things that also came up that was really important for people to be aware of were these gender biases. First of all, getting exposure and understanding to what are the gender biases and gender stereotypes can be helpful, and then doing some reflection of what is it that I hold. We know that these are things that got started when we were babies, and so a lot of it is happening at an unconscious level. It's very helpful in a way to do that kind of self-awareness, self-probing, to think through what might some of my gender biases be that are putting blinders on me, that are impeding the way in which I see things, my perspective. We also know now that balancing the number of men and women on teams is, I don't have to tell you, there are very different dynamics when you have females in the room and when you have just one female on a project, let's say, or two or three. Currently, people are recommending having at least 3 females on a project team or on a committee so that you can, it enables them to feel more comfortable in stating their opinions, and it enables the rest of the team to hear their voices more. Endorse the authority of female leaders. Had a wonderful example, a woman in a high-tech firm, she was very high up in the organization, was getting an assignment to Asia. And she initially was a little hesitant about it, but what happened was the head of Asia at that time wrote a letter to everyone, all of his direct reports, endorsing her authority. And she said, Anna Marie, it opened doors for me. She said, I immediately was accepted. He wrote a beautiful letter explaining what my talents were, what my skill sets were, and how lucky they were to have me. And she said, I realized at that point in time that if we could do some more endorsements, endorsing the authority of female leaders, endorsing their talent, endorsing their knowledge and expertise, it would make it a whole lot easier for the leader, and obviously has ramifications for the organization. Give women challenging assignments with sufficient support. Lots of times women are passed over for the challenging assignments. Very often in an organization, there are key plum assignments that lead or that enable one to get the key experiences and the kinds of experiences one needs in order to advance. And lots of times women are not given these challenging assignments. And so this is something that managers can pay special attention to and offer up the names of females when the issue comes up about various openings. Of course, providing external coaches. I mentioned coaching and mentoring before. Coaching is seen now as having tremendous value. It provides a kind of a one-on-one situation, usually for a period of several months, and it enables a leader to be able to think through and make some changes in some of the behaviors to enable them to even be better leaders than they currently are. The glass cliff jobs, those are impossible jobs. In many organizations, I don't know if you have them here, but I wanted to mention this to you. Many organizations, you have jobs that nobody will take. Why? Because everybody who's had that job before has failed. And it may take 3 or 4 failures for people to really realize, oh, gee, every time we've put somebody in there, it hasn't worked out. lots of times women are not, and minorities as well, are not tuned into those jobs. Why? Because those are the kinds of things that are often passed along in the network. Don't take such and such a job. Nobody does well in that. But it's offered to a female, and unbeknownst to her lots of times, she just will take the job and then fail. And then, of course, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So do you have any sorts of positions like that that you've heard about here? No, it may not come up, but it's something to be aware of should the opportunity arise. Some proactive tips and strategies for women. Well, as I mentioned earlier, sponsoring networks. So your BWIS, here you have an organization that is active in networking, just even getting to know each other. One of the things that I heard a lot of was that women need to hear each other's stories. You know, we are caught up in this. It's 2013, but we're still caught up in these issues associated with our gender role. And lots of times we're still trying to figure out, how do we do it all? How do we be good wives, mothers, show our nurturing side, enable ourselves to be nurturing towards others and sensitive to our family's needs, whatever they might be, and yet be a strong leader and be, in fact, an excellent professional in our field. And so lots of times women just need to hear each other's stories. Last week I was in California. I was serving on a panel for the report on the status of women and girls in California. The actress Gina Davis was a keynote speaker, and they had several. She has an institute for the study of gender in media, which is a whole nother area of discussion. But there were panels of several of us in various fields. So, and in each of those instances, they asked us if we would tell a little personal story about ourselves. There was an audience of 800 people, students, faculty at this college, people in the business world in Los Angeles. And so people told a little bit about themselves. Why? Because we need to still hear each other's stories and understand how we come to be doing the work we're doing. Look for opportunities for giving and receiving mentoring or sponsoring. So if you are in a role where you're more in the top of your organization, being able to mentor others is very important. And if you are in a role where you are in the early stages of your career, looking around for who can mentor you, who might help you, is also, is very, very important. And so I know that you've got an mentoring program starting here, and I would say, by all means, go for full participation. Because this is very, very helpful, and there's a lot of research showing the value of mentoring. Be willing to take on the high visibility plum assignments and prepare for them. So let's say you're being asked to, in your cases here, perhaps head up a committee or a task force, and go for it. Why not? Figure out a way of juggling what you have to juggle, but that kind of experience is extremely helpful in enabling you to develop your leadership skills, and it can be a stepping stone to leading to some bigger and better things. Seek candid performance feedback and request mentoring and coaching. Very often, again, research on this, women do not receive feedback on their performance. And I could say tons about this. In the interest of time, I won't. But I will just say that if you are feeling yourself to be in a feedback void, you're not sure how you're performing, or you really need some more tips, ask for it. People are often very reluctant to give feedback. We humans hate giving feedback about performance. That's why we have these elaborate human resource performance training programs about every 5 years or so, because we really hate doing it. But it is very, very valuable. And when somebody gives you some constructive feedback, you have 2 words to say, right? Thank you. No buts, no excuses, just thank you. Use the available supervisory or leadership training to leverage your potential as a leader in science. As I understand it, you have some opportunities available to you here. to be able to take some further training. I know I was extremely impressed when I went on your website and I saw all of the events and activities that BWIS sponsors for people to be able to develop their skills in negotiation skills, I believe you. So managing conflict, communication skills, very, very important. So take full advantage of those. It would be foolish not to. I'm bringing this up again because now I'm going to ask you to think about an action that you can take. And before I do, I'm putting these up again so that perhaps they may provide some food for thought for you. Because now I'd like you to think about what you need to do differently to develop yourself as a leader, and what is one specific behavior you must adopt to expand your professional network. And I'd like you to, if you have some paper handy, jot it down. And I'd like you then to think about that, take a moment to think about it, and I'm going to ask you to select a buddy, maybe it's somebody that you know well here, or maybe it's somebody just sitting next to you. And each of you take maybe 2 minutes, and I'll cue you when this is over, and discuss how you're going to achieve these goals. So go ahead and start. Find someone, and take a few minutes. We'll allow about 4 to 5 minutes for this entire exercise. And I will cue you in between so that you can switch. If one of you is talking too much, it's time to go to the other person. All right? Don't be shy. It's an opportunity for you to think about this and chat with somebody. And it could cover anything in the areas that I mentioned. Maybe a course you might want to take. Maybe an opportunity that's been offered to you that you've been resisting. Maybe it's in the area of communication skills. Maybe it's something as simple as going to one of the BWIS events. Okay. In the interests of time, I'll ask you to curtail your discussion right now. But clearly, these are discussions that you can continue to have, perhaps over lunch or a cup of coffee or something like that. And I'd like to leave you with one thought today, which is, what is one thing you can do to develop the talent of others, and what can you do for yourself? So there's 2 aspects here, because it involves reaching out to some other folks and also, in a way, doing something good for yourself as well. So any questions on anything that I've covered so far, or any comments that you may want to make? Thoughts? Yes?
Do you find that developing women leaders in STEM fields is significantly different from developing them in other fields, since there tends to be a belief that you have to have real scientific chops to be a manager of other scientists?
I think that the leadership competencies are the same, and in fact, what I did not show you in the interest of time that would be very appropriate now is this. So what are the leadership competencies men and women in science must develop and demonstrate? And it's primarily, you've got a lot of the technical knowledge, obviously, and the technical skills. And we see this in the business world as well. But it's often the interpersonal skills and the communication skills, right? So it's a matter of influencing others. That's why my focus today was on the interpersonal and the communication skills. It's the influencing others. It's reaching out to others. It's building networks of people so that you know where to go to get certain things done. And the communication skills. This thing is also sometimes called executive presence. It's a combination of the way you look, the way you speak, the comportment. And I work with men and women on both of these, by the way, on both men and women on this, by the way. Where I think it is different, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to reach out to people in STEM. Part of it is, as I mentioned, I had the biopsych background, and so I do understand a little bit more about science than a lot of people in my field. But because I saw there are greater needs. I mean, it's documented, obviously. We have a deficit of women and minorities in the STEM fields. And also because of the work I have been doing in working with people in various companies and organizations in the STEM field, that I think that there's still a lot of work to be done. But what I'm seeing happening is that things are changing rapidly. As I said, you can't open the newspaper without seeing some change going on in women's leadership. And so my message, in a way, for you is to see, here are some things you could be working on. Here are things that organizations could be working on and managers could be working on so that we do get more women into the pipeline of the leadership pipeline in organizations such as BNL or other companies that are dealing in the STEM fields. So these competencies, the skill sets are parallel. A good leader is a good leader. We know how to grow good leaders, no matter what the field. I mean, thank goodness the leadership literature and research has advanced, particularly in the last 10 to 15 years. So we have a good feeling for what does it take. And those things that I listed for you, coaching, mentoring, et cetera, but the development of key experiences and the development in these areas is critical. Now it's a question of you folks in BNL, let's say, figuring out where can I get some of these experiences? How can I get some of these experiences? The organization is beginning to do its part, I believe. The mentoring program is one aspect. You perhaps will be seeing more. But it's almost like a triple effort. It's the individual, the organization, and society. And so you can make the greatest impact as an individual. You can do things for yourself, and then over time, hopefully, the organization will begin to bring in more things that it can do to develop your leadership. Does that answer your question? Okay. Other questions or comments? Yes, Benita?
You make the statement somewhere that in each group, it's nice to have 3 women.
Oh, yes.
Or what is the importance of having a critical mass? Now, I often go to professional meetings, and very often there will be 100 men and 3 women or 5 women in the whole room.
Right.
I'm part of groups in projects where I may be the only woman on a 10-man team. And it is a difficult situation to be in because as you said, I'm trying to tread a fine line between being passive and aggressive.
Okay.
And assertive or quiet.
Right.
And
right.
but does critical mass play a role before significant progress can be made?
Okay. They did ask me to repeat the question. So the question was, is there, I had mentioned that there was a sort of a critical mass of women in groups that are needed so that the women's voices are heard. Well, for one thing, there actually is some research showing that males hear different frequencies, and you folks may know this actually, different frequencies of sound differently. So they are more tuned into lower voices, and they do not hear higher frequencies or higher voices as well. So that's one thing. Secondly, it's very difficult if you are the sole member in a group to be able to be heard. You're alone. It's very difficult. So, and the thought is that if there are just 2 women, there's been some research on this as well, but if there are just 2 women, they often don't have enough of a critical mass or enough, there's not enough of them. And very often they're sitting together at a table, so the males are on one side, the females are on the other side. But if there are 3 or more, lots of times they are able to create more of a force, shall we say, and I don't mean that in any technical sense, but create more of an impetus. And that's why now I say, people are saying now we need to have like 3 women. But the idea is, ideally, you want to have a balance on teams. You know, ideally, you want to have more a balance of male and females on teams. And the other issue is the self-confidence issue. Because very often, as part of our gender role, women are taught not to be pushy or aggressive. You're ostracized if you are. And you're not encouraged to speak up. Fortunately, I think that's changing, but perhaps not rapidly enough. And so the issue is one's self-confidence. How confident are you to be able to stand, to offer your ideas and your thoughts? And it's a very big issue. I deal with that a lot with women where I'm called in, and there's women very well considered, but often will not speak up. And I have to. The coaching is very helpful because lots of times the coach can be very supportive. We have conversations in advance and prepare people for meetings and sessions that they may be in, and then they're able to speak up more. And also sometimes working with a boss, because in the coaching relationship, you're often working with the bosses and cueing the boss that when she's giving a suggestion, you value her suggestions. You give her encouragement, reinforce her for what it is she's saying and how she's saying it. And if she needs some correction or feedback, provide that too. Anything else? There's one. Yes? I'm sorry, could you speak up a little bit?
Yeah, there were some very different characteristics of men and women that you showed different ways to approach things. It seems like some of what you talked about ties into risk aversion, risk tolerance. Is there any literature on that? Because it ties into self-confidence.
Great question.
How do you deal with risk tolerance?
Yes. So the question was, showing the gender differences, was there any, do we see any differences in risk aversion between males and females? And the answer is yes. There is some literature showing that females are more risk averse than males. And fine, that's okay. Now the question is, so what do we do with that? And there's been a lot written about risk aversion in relation to, say, taking risks associated with financial decisions. So the issue of if we had more women on Wall Street, would we have had the kinds of crashes that we have had? Could they have been prevented? There's also a question related to even issues associated with world peace. Could we have averted some of the situations that we have had in the world if we had more female leaders? Why? Because they may be more risk averse. Right? So these are huge questions to ask. But the research does show that there may be some greater risk aversion for females. Why that is the case is also very interesting to speculate about. And there are a lot of different theories around about that. But does it relate to self-confidence? Yes, it absolutely could be related. I haven't seen studies on that done yet, but there may be some out there. I think our time is up. I know that you all are having to head back. It has been very enjoyable to do this today with you. I hope that it was valuable. And if anybody would like to ask me, has a time, would like to ask some more questions, I'm here. So thank you very much.